research indicated that depending on how you ask the questions, so they actually reverse ask them and then you have to flip the numbers around. Just pay attention to those details. These folks have given not only permission for everyone to use this scale, but also permission to use all their education that's involved, like literally, you know, you're allowed to cut and paste my slides and rearrange them all you want. They just are all about kind of international education on creating more resilience and awareness of where we might be affected in our work. Oh, I had something put aside on my laptop, but I realized I don't have my laptop. The statistics of, say, first responders, 70,000 Canadians, first responders, have met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of their job. That's the full end of the spectrum where they meet the whole criteria of PTSD as opposed to parts of that criteria, in which case they would get a different category. But 70,000 Canadian first responders.
What is the percentage overall? All the first responders?
I don't know.
1 in 4.
1 in 4, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't.
There you go.
1 in 4 first, paramedics.
Paramedics.
Talk about first responders.
20% of social workers, the research, you know, is that 20% would meet the criteria for secondary traumatic stress at some point in their career. 50% are all in this high risk for that. So when it comes to this questionnaire you're going through, this is like most, you know, or not most, but a good half, you know. And I would, you know, in these reporting scales, we're requiring, you know, given that we know we tend to underreport on these things, we can guess that it's probably higher than that still. So this is just a list from the Trauma-Informed Practice BC curriculum of some of the markers of getting into this category that you might be experiencing some degrees of vicarious traumatization. The job performance, obsession about detail, decreased productivity, avoidance of certain tasks, low motivation. So a lot of these, you know, you look at that and you think if that was going on for you, you might just think, what's the matter with me? I'm so lazy. You know, you might not think like, oh, this might be my brainstem. It's actually been kind of overstimulated to just enough shock exposure that it's starting to kind of have aversion to my work. You know, and again, what matters is the change. Like, I've never been good at paperwork, so the fact that I avoid paperwork, I can't really chalk up to this. But if there's a big change in some other thing, then that's the thing to pay attention to. Morale, behavior, and then interpersonal issues, poor communication, self-conflicts. Just checking my time. So Matt Johnson has been doing this occupational awareness training for first responder trauma. He gave us the little firefighter seal of approval. I love, you know, he did a really nice job. He gave me permission to use some of his slides. Some of the serious signs and symptoms that they outline and recognize for first responders: difficulty sleeping, nightmares and night terrors, unwanted thoughts and feelings that affect concentration, flashbacks, powerful, troubling imagery, chronic fatigue, loss of interest, irritability towards others, including coworkers and loved ones, addictions, including alcohol, drugs, and body enhancement supplements, self-isolating behaviors, lack of interest in social connection, frequent feelings of hopelessness, shame, or guilt, and then compulsion to work excessively at the expense of important relationships. So there can almost be, because one of the symptoms of trauma,
I don't think there's anything on that list that doesn't apply to me.
There you go. When you talk about that hyperarousal symptom that's embedded in that, so that's where you feel more irritable and there's just more adrenaline kind of pumping through your system. One of the impulses, what to do with that, is just go work more. You know, so that is, again, it's this slippery slope, because people can just look like they're really into their work, or they're just more interested in their work, but it's partly because their nervous system's having a hard time coming down. So then hanging out with friends, doing something sort of casual, it sort of becomes less available, so that it feels actually safer for my self-image to just go work more. Yeah. Yeah.
Be a adrenaline response.
Absolutely. Yeah, the essentially when we're exposed to traumatic events through our own life or through the stories that we're sitting with of other people's, our nervous system is going into its own little experience of fight or flight. And that has this whole cortisol effect. And if that's happening too much, then there becomes this kind of excessive arousal of the whole nervous system. It's really hard to sleep. You're generally on guard. You walk into a room, you're assessing for danger on a regular basis because you're keyed up. And there's just biology of that. So yeah.
Does that get better?
Yeah, does it get better you mean, in what do you, to say more about the question?
The anxiety, does it lessen?
Yeah, it lessens, but it responds well to support. It lessens with strategies. It's the whole, it can lessen, but it also might not lessen. It might even exaggerate if you just keep ignoring and putting yourself back into more and more exposure without changing the way you kind of help your nervous system come out of that. Alcohol and drugs, it's really natural. There's huge cultures around like, okay, at the end of this really stressful experience, we're all going to have beers together. But you're also loading up your liver with having to process alcohol when you also have to process all the cortisol that's been released. So you can actually slow down the processing of that experience just by taking drugs that need your liver, like literal biology way.
With being in this sort of category of serious signs and symptoms, can you just sort of slide into the burnout where you're kind of not, like things are all shut down because you just overwhelmed the system being able to cope? Like is there that correlation?
Absolutely, yeah. So there can be some people have a real acute presentation and other people have a much more kind of gradual, like just kind of like the symptoms sneak up on them. And so yeah, that's the piece is that the literature that's out there is that it shows up in very different ways. I think in depending on what you do, first responders are not so much they're in a secondary exposure, but they're also in a primary exposure. So they're in both all the time. My heart goes out to them. Yeah, I'm so grateful for that work. I think when you're in a more secondary exposure, it's more common to be in a sort of slow experience, unless sometimes there's a particular story, there's a particular person, there's a level of closeness, there's someone you relate to, someone you really can't help who you thought you could help, years of that, and those, there can be sort of spikes where certain client relationships affect you more, but then there's also the just general exposure. It's always happening. And I think depending on that, you can have a mix of a slow, gradual, experiencing of some of these symptoms, or a real, wow, suddenly it feels like, I've been traumatized by my work, but it doesn't make sense to me necessarily because I've been doing this for a very long time. So this, again, from the firefighter's perspective, top terrible 10 for first responders. So line of duty death, suicide of a colleague, which is really high among firefighters and first responders, serious work-related injuries, multi-casualty, terrorism incidents, events with a high degree of threat to the personnel. And this applies, I think I encourage you to sort of look at this list and think of your environment, because you can be humming along fine, but then suddenly, I know when I was working at Nelson Mental Health, we went through a kind of threat to the personnel that I remember very well, and suddenly the other things that seemed to be fine for me weren't as fine. I was a little bit more on guard. So I think we have different environments, but these might apply. Significant events involving children, events with the victim is known to us, event with excessive media interest. That one's interesting because the media playing an event over and over again also overexposes us, and it means that we can't really let go. So sometimes what I found in my work is that media story would come up that was really close to some other story that I'd been working with, and I maybe thought I'd processed that event, but with this constant media presentation through my Facebook or through some other means that I'm getting exposed, I'm now having kind of flashbacks of this other event of somebody that I worked with in trauma therapy. Events that are prolonged and end with a negative outcome. any significant, powerful, overwhelming, distressing event. Stress management clinic, sorry, it's closed due to burnout. Another one, Frank just up and exploded. I hope I never get that burnout. I just want to make sure we have enough time. So, what's our strongest protection against vicarious trauma? Before we move on to this, any kind of thoughts or questions on the slides that we've already looked at there? Pardon? Because it's so real. It's what we're working with, and it changes. And that's the main thing I want us to kind of realize is that we might love our work, and the degree to which our nervous system, which isn't really you, it's you and the whole wiring that goes underneath of you. You might think this is fine, but your nervous system might not think it's fine. And you might get the first clue of that because you suddenly can't sleep, or you're, in my case, I'd be obsessing about something about my child but it's like, oh, but in general, I think I'm affected by my job right now. And so it's showing up in this other subtle way that's not really direct and not having flashbacks necessarily. But just to kind of track for that in yourself and honor that, because one of the research articles I read on police was that if they looked at incidents from last year for how it's affecting a police officer this year, the protective factor were people that were identifying and processing that they were affected and talking about it to their supervisor, to their therapist, to their whatever way they had of addressing it. That was the protective factor. The folks that were in denial were a much higher vulnerability for actually getting more stuck in those symptoms. So, and nobody can know. A lot of it is happening inside of you. So you might just look irritated or a little bit shut down. But for you to go, okay, this might be a work injury that's starting to come on, and I don't want to wait till it's full blown. And it doesn't mean that you need to do anything that, it doesn't mean you have to go on medication for it if you don't want to or anything like that. But it is good to go, I think I might be having like a 20% shift in my general nervous system well-being, and I need to kind of level with that, because it's not a matter of you not being good enough or not being competent. It's just your brainstem has now decided there's a little bit, like, it's too full now. So, self-awareness, the art of utilizing critical thinking and reflective skills to assess one's overall being. When we become aware that we are out of balance, it's our professional and personal responsibility to create an intervention. And the what intervention varies for everybody. But self-care, mental, physical, spiritual, interpersonal, community. And like I said, I was working with one person that said, they were working in an ambulance on the coast, and they were saying, everything was fine, but then I went through a relationship breakup that was kind of more heartbreaking than usual, and suddenly I couldn't tolerate my job. And they felt kind of embarrassed that these things, it was just like, I should be able to keep my professional and personal lives. but when you work as a care provider, it is your body, this is your tool. This is your main tool. So you can, whatever's affecting this as a human being is going to be some stuff that can affect your ability to do that work. So what is self-care? World Health Organization defines it as activities individuals, families, and communities undertake with the intention of enhancing health, preventing disease, limiting illness, and restoring health. It's like thinking, it's nice, that's you have a balance wheel that I gave you mainly to work out on your own, but it's all the different domains: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, positive relationships, school, work-life balance. So there's lots of benefits of self-care. We hear about it all the time. Oh, me, nothing much. Treated dozen patients, did the charts, wrote in a protocol, gave a seminar, fixed the computer, now it's lunchtime. Add in there, like, tended a death, consult someone whose partner died of suicide, Now it's lunch, right? It's like, of course. So why is it hard? It's notoriously hard for people to take time for self-care in this field. Might seem self-serving, make us feel guilty. We might have a lack of awareness of our own needs. We're better at paying attention to other people's needs. Belief that our training insulates us from the risk. So we often think, well, I treat people with depression. How could I be depressed? It's an innocent, logical thought that we might have, but it's just not necessarily about you, and it's not necessarily about the knowledge you have. It's about a kind of effect. There's sort of this culture of workaholism. I don't say martyrdom is another way to put that. Self-care takes hard work and discipline, and all of those reasons. Let's see if this link works. Is the volume working? No. Wonderful.
There was a day which was in brush your teeth, and I think mindfulness practice is a form of brain brushing. If it's done in a daily way, you actually keep the circuits of compassion, self-compassion, and other compassion very much alive. And that's been shown over and over again. And the idea now is to take those fantastic ancient teachings, those wonderful recent research findings, and then apply them in the modern world so that people do have a form of brain hygiene.
Can people hear this? Yeah?
So, however you define mindfulness, there are three big ways to define mindfulness. One is just the English use of the term, being conscientious, caring, and intentional in parenting. That's how Mary Hart's and I use it in our book, Parenting Inside Out. But it also turns out there are two other forms of the use of the word mindful and mindfulness. And one is the contemplative form, which is the idea that can you be present on purpose, tracking moment-to-moment experience without judgment. And, so that's been written about. Certainly people like John Kabat-Zinn and Jack Cornfield have really promoted mindfulness that way. And it's a beautiful and important form of training the mind. The third kind of mindfulness, besides conscientious one and the one that's about contemplation, is the idea of creative mindfulness that Ellen Langer writes about. And that's the idea of not coming to premature closure on assumptions or categories and really kind of remaining open. And so whichever kind of mindfulness you're referring to, creative, contemplative, or conscientious, there's a role in mindfulness in all these three broad ways, and whatever other ways we can imagine. In parenting, parents need to be conscientious, intentional, and caring in what they do. They need to be present moment to moment, tracking experiences, letting go of judgments, really being open and kind, compassionate, having self-compassion, doing all these beautiful things that mindfulness practice brings about. They also need to be creative, so they aren't putting premature conclusions about who their child is and be open to unfolding the child as they go. So, in all these ways, yes, mindful parenting is really important.
So he's a parent educator, but he's also fabulous, and everything he teaches applies to us in our work, for those who aren't parents. Any questions or thoughts on mindfulness in general?
My name is Dan Siegel.
So he's Daniel Siegel. For those who don't know him, he has this amazing way of just teaching and talking about the brain. And so you can look him up as like the handy brain model, because he helps. I find it's very, very helpful. You'll hear me, the way I talk about it is that it's not really necessarily up to you what your brainstem is triggered by. And why I say it that way is literally because the you that, maybe went to school, trained, did all these things, has certain values, that's up here. But that you have these more primitive parts of your brain that are governing the fight or flight system. And understanding how that works is very helpful, because you then realize, oh yeah, like I'm suddenly really pissed off at all my clients. I haven't changed my values. I definitely do not value that. I don't value that, but I am triggered, I'm angry, and that's coming from a more primitive part of my brain that's having sort of a loop there. And understanding that, and then understanding how mindfulness actually allows us to work, building the skill of where we put our attention, how we pay attention in our world and in ourselves, is something that can very much help us process trauma, but also avoid trauma in the first place, in terms of avoid stuck trauma, avoid getting injured in our work. I'm curious just on opening it up for people's different practices in their world, mindfulness or otherwise, that help them either process hard events or help you that you're using with clients, you know, when you notice that you're a bit more triggered or something's going on for you. So I just want to open it up, if it's okay for us to share as a big group, if there's any kind of thoughts or...
Well, I can share my work. I just go debrief with another staff, which is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, empathetic, even if I'm swearing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you gotta get it out.
You got to get it out. Wonderful. And is there qualities that make the staff that you would choose to debrief with kind of more appealing than other?
No, I think we're a pretty good team and whoever's available.
Wonderful. That's
And I know our coordinators, Andy and my fellow staff.
wonderful. Other practices, habits, things you do.
Walking
Walking.
or driving.
Uh-huh.
Picking a distance and thinking, okay, I'm going to leave it there. Just
Oh, say that to you.
So I live in Nelson, work in Castlegar, so I use the junction as kind of a place to think to, and then so I leave that at the junction. So by the time I'm home, I put music on and stuff.
Brilliant. And where do you work?
Castlegar Community Service.
Castlegar Community Service. Brilliant example of mindfulness, right? Because you're giving yourself a period of time to process and think, and now, but then you're like, okay, now I'm actually deciding where I'm going to put my attention. Of course, after the junction, I bet some thoughts come in.
Yeah,
And what do?
put some music on.
Put some music
Or the
on.
radio goes
Yeah.
on,
Yeah. Okay. Super example. Other examples.
When I first started working, I didn't quite know how to not bring things home.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the first nights something really affected me. I had to pick my daughter up on the way home from work, and so I told her she needed to go in the house. I wasn't ready to come in the house, and I just sat on the driveway for probably 15 minutes and just let some of it settle. And then I still wasn't quite ready to engage with my family, so I just started the practice of when I need to disengage a little further with what's going on, then I'll go in and have a shower right away. My husband knows that's the cue. Okay, she's not ready to talk, she's not ready to eat, I need to go in. So I'll just go and stand in the shower until I'm ready to come out to do my job.
Such a great example, because what you're talking about there is the self-awareness to track, check in. Am I ready? How am I doing? Like, you just said that alone. It's like if we all just did that more. How am I doing? What do I need to get into a better place? Try tier 1 intervention with myself. Okay, that's not enough. Tier 2. If you tried showers and they did nothing, you would have kept on until you found something that was working. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's some similarities. I mean, I debrief with my executive director, and I have a steam room therapy where I go in and I meditate, and it brings me back down to earth and have a hard day.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
I spent 31 years in leasing, and I have horses, and in my time I came home at night. I went to the barn to create, and I like to think of it now as creating positive memories on top of traumatic events. And I mucked skulls, brushed horses, whatever it took at 2 in the morning, 5 in the morning, whatever.
Beautiful.
And I really do think it helped.
Yeah. Amazing. Other? Yeah.
Similar to the shower thing, I use like a separate soap that's specifically for after work. And so it's like this like really beautiful scent, and it's like only for that purpose. So it's like washing my work away.
Uh-huh.
So it's like this ritual after work that is just like, okay, this is as soon as I'm done my shower, like that's it. It's all down the drain, and I'm completing my day.
Wonderful. Okay, super. Then we could spend a lot of time on that. And that, you know, having even a culture where we talk about that gives us all permission to be like, oh, wait, yeah. We need these things, yeah.
Another thing is looking at your day and looking at the smallest thing that was good too.
Yeah.
Because we might have a really hard day, but there's always something, right?
Yeah.
I have the magic of working with kids, and they teach me something every single day.
Yeah. Wonderful. Just want to check on time. How much do we have left? 15 minutes. Okay, super. That's lots of time. So your wellness wheel. These are the different domains. If you just Google wellness wheel, if you're doing this at home and you want to read, like, what exactly are they putting in this category, that category? You can't read this right now. You'll get my slides. I'm not sure you'll be able to read them if depending on how small it comes out. But this is easy to find. You'll find exactly this wellness wheel. The idea with this is just to kind of fill in the pie on that category, you know, how you're doing in each of the domains. Because a lot of us tend to focus on one domain, but we don't necessarily spread it out. And, you know, some people say you don't have a religious belief, but there might be ways that you would still be able to kind of enhance the spiritual side of your life in a way that's meaningful to you if you kind of, okay, maybe there are spiritual practices, even though I'm not going to say attend a church, there's maybe other things that would count in some way for me that would be in this category that could be quite broad of what that looks like. Experiences in nature, for example. You know, different pieces. So this is one way of checking in with ourselves, how we're doing, and you know, the follow through. Then it's like, okay, I'm not doing well in this area. What am I going to do about it? And then how am I going to create a plan to sort of address that, and then reassess. That was mine the day that I made these slides. Snoopy. Okay, gang, it's jogging time. Nope. Come on, I need the exercise. I have these stubborn feet. So, you know, I think it's interesting, right? Because if any of you work with depression, we're often kind of look at the fact that self-care, the very thing that could be self-care, could also be actually a symptom. So I might be avoiding all physical activity, and at one point in my life, that could be the most self-care thing I could do. I'm just going to just laze around for 3 days in my pajamas. But then another point in my life, the fact that I'm doing that might be actually a depression symptom, and I'm kind of getting worse. And it's actually, so I think again, it's not necessarily what our mind might think, but to kind of go, okay, I laze around all day in my pajamas. How did that work for me? Did that fill me up? Do I feel actually more revived and more resourced? I debriefed with my colleague. How did that work for me? Like I know in mental health, there can be a culture where sometimes our debriefing actually makes, I would watch like the way we debrief can actually make everyone kind of more stressed and unwell, you know, more hopeless, more helpless, more stuff, more, you know, all of that. So it's like just checking in and then tweaking what the practice is until you find ones that are actually working. And the coffee, I have to hear about your insomnia with the giant coffee. I mean, this is for me, it can be that vicious cycle of any drug use, right? It's like, oh, you didn't get a good night's sleep, so you didn't have your coffee, but now you're drinking coffee morning, noon, and night, and then of course it's not necessarily great for your sleep. So there's this cycle with, you know, drug interventions of all kinds that we need to pay attention to. Busy people with lots of people to care for in our lives. Taking the time to meditate can be hard. It's a nice idea, but then it's like, come on. We want to kind of quantify inner peace. I need the fast and easy way to get there. I'm sensing you may still have some boundary issues. Okay. So, big laundry list. I'm going to just pass through the self-care strategies, but again, if you'll get this in slides. There's a whole bunch, you know, laughing more, core values, inventory, mobile. Like I think if you feel like this is an area you need to improve on, but you're a little stuck about what to do because you have so little time, or I think doing some research and actually thinking, okay, like at any point in your life, you might have be able to bring in a whole new practices. So reassessing, adding new things in, checking it out. You know, I think since the advent of this, a lot of us in our kind of downtime are just kind of finding other ways to kind of numb out or be busy, you know. So I'd like to see that they have their unplug electronics, you know, as like a possibility that might work for you. We're all so different, so just keeping creative and realizing that